Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports with another football video, and today I'm going over my Week 15 Power Rankings for the 2023 NFL season. I do Power Rankings on the channel every single week. I know I haven't posted a lot of videos recently, but I'm officially done with my work for school for the semester. So this week I will be posting more videos. I'll be doing a predictions video, I'll be doing a playoff video, and I'll also possibly be doing an MVP video. So let's get right into it. First off, we have the dumpster fire as always. We have the Carolina Panthers at 32, the New England Patriots at 31, and the Washington Commanders at 30. The Panthers lost as per usual, the Commanders didn't play, and the Patriots beat the Steelers. They're still at 31 simply because, Washington didn't play, so I'm not going to move them down. And honestly, I don't really want to move the Patriots up at this point. It was an okay game. We played well in the first half. We didn't play well in the second half. But we did beat a good team, so props where props are due. Bailey Zappi played a decent game. So hopefully Bailey Zappi could be the future for next season, depending on who we get in the draft. But for right now, 31, I think, is a fair spot for how the Patriots have played this season. And yeah, the Panthers, they lost again, so they stayed at 32, and Washington didn't play. Moving on to bad, we have the Giants at 29, the Tennessee Titans at 28, and the Cardinals at 27. None of these teams have played. The Titans and the Giants are both playing tomorrow night. The Titans are playing Miami, and the Giants are playing the Packers. And the Cardinals didn't play this week. All three of these teams did lose positions in the power rankings, though, because they were passed up by other teams who played very impressive games against strong teams. I usually don't like moving teams down when they haven't played or are on bye, but the other teams played very impressive games, so they did end up moving down. I don't really expect the Giants or the Titans to move up or down from this spot. If the Titans win against Miami, then they'll definitely move up, but I don't expect that to happen. Same thing with the Giants. If they beat the Packers, then they'll move up, but I don't really expect that to happen. Moving on to mid, we have the Raiders at 26, the Jets at 25, the Chargers at 24, and the Bears at 23. The Raiders have moved down 3 positions this week for that horrendous game. I'm just calling it a bye week where the Raiders ended up getting a loss and the Vikings ended up getting a win. This was the 4th game since 1980 that's finished 3-0. I was hoping for a 0-0 tie, but sadly, we were not given the pleasure. I was hoping at least for overtime, but we were 1 minute and 47 seconds short of overtime. So Raiders lost 3-0. They lose 3 positions. I almost put them below Arizona, but Arizona didn't play. So because they didn't play, I didn't put them below Arizona. At 25, we have the Jets. The Jets gained 4 positions this week for their very strong win over the Houston Texans. Obviously, CJ Stroud went out with a concussion, but the Jets' offense has looked better than it's looked the entire season. They played a strong game. They put up 30 points. It was a very solid game of football. So they moved up 4 positions. I'm tempted to put them above the Chargers, but the only reason why I didn't is because not that long ago the Chargers demolished the Jets 27-6. I don't usually put a whole lot of stock into individual matchups, but that was just such a solid demolition of the Jets that I had to keep the Chargers above them at least for this week. If the Jets win next week and the Chargers lose again, I'll definitely be putting the Jets above them. But for this week, I'm keeping the Chargers above them. So the Chargers are at 24. They've lost 2 spots for their loss this week. And the Chargers just look horrendous. They beat the Patriots last week 6-0, but that game doesn't really count for anything. And then this week, their offense couldn't do a single thing. And the Chargers are not the Chargers are a bad football team. Their defense is horrendous. Their offense is losing pace every single game. I know that Justin Herbert went out with injury, but Easton Stick looked better than Justin Herbert today. The offense is just completely discombobulated. It's getting worse every week, and the Chargers are a mess right now. 24, I think, is generous for them. And at 23, we have the Chicago Bears, who have gained 5 spots from last week. Last week they were at 28, now they're up to 23. And the Bears are simply playing good football right now. They've won 3 of their last either 4 or 5 games. They've beaten some strong teams. This week they beat the Lions, a divisional matchup. And then in their last game against the Lions, it was 31-26. They only lost by 5. This week they demolished them 28-13. The Bears have beaten the Lions in their series this year, if you go by points as the tiebreaker. They're playing good football. They're getting wins. And 23, I think, is a good spot for them for this week, but I can definitely see them improving in coming weeks with how they've been playing recently. They're 5-8. I can see them being better than some of the 6 and 7 teams that I have in the tier slightly above them. So, although I do have them at 23, I think that they could be in the top 20 in the coming weeks. In the top 20, or at 22, we have the Saints. At 21, we have the Falcons. At 20, we have the Buccaneers. At 19, we have the Seahawks. And at 18, we have the Steelers. This category is called NFC South-ish, because we have 3 NFC South teams and then 2 other teams. The Saints did lose 2 positions in a win. That's because their win didn't count for anything because it was against the Carolina Panthers. And the other teams, there are some teams that moved above them. So Tampa is one of those teams. Tampa, sometimes I reevaluate teams depending on games that they play. So this week, Tampa got reevaluated with their win over the Falcons. I noticed that Tampa currently only has 1 loss in the division. They split with the Falcons. They beat the Panthers once and they beat the Saints once. So they're 3-1 in their division. And they have the strongest divisional record of the 3 teams here. So because of that, I'm giving Tampa the tiebreaker in the NFC South right now. I'm basically ordering the NFC South teams currently based on how their standings are and the tiebreakers are right now. The positions are almost arbitrary at this point because these 3 teams have had completely different trajectories this season. They've all been hot at different times. They've all been cold at different times. They've all had good offenses at different times. They've all had good defenses at different times. It's impossible to really gauge how good any of these teams are right now. So I think that having all of them in the bottom half, but all kind of tied with each other is fair. But none of them are playing well. They're all playing fairly poorly for 6 and 7 teams. So considering there's a lot of 6 and 7 teams this year, they're towards the bottom end. But if any of them can break away over the last 3 or 4 weeks, then I'd like to see that. It would be cool to see a definitive victor in that division. The Falcons lost 2 spots with their loss, and the Buccaneers gained 5 spots because I reevaluated them and how they've been doing this season. The Seahawks are at 19 and the Steelers are at 18. The Steelers lost 3 positions for their loss to the Patriots, and the Seahawks lost 1 position for their loss to the 49ers. It was a bad loss. It was a horrendous looking loss, but it was to the 49ers. And Seattle has lost now, 4 or 5 games in a row? I think it's 4 games in a row, and they've lost 5 of their last 6. So Seattle has played horrendous recently, but the difference is that they've played an extremely hard schedule. They played the Niners twice. They played well against Dallas. I think they've played the Eagles in there somewhere, and maybe Miami. I'm not entirely sure. I looked at this earlier, but they've had an extremely difficult schedule, and they haven't played terrible in all of the games. They're at 19 right now. They could be lower. It's arguable they could be 22 because they've lost so many games in a row. But they've had such a world's harder schedule than the Buccaneers, the Falcons, and the Saints that I think it's fair to keep them above them until they lose to a bad team. As for the Steelers at 18, again, there's an argument the Steelers could be lower, but yeah, the Steelers are losing spots every week. It's tough to put them a whole lot lower than 18 because they have beaten a lot of strong teams this season. They've had a tough schedule. This was kind of a fluke week, but with Mitch Trubisky, they've been really bad. So I can definitely see them losing a lot of spots next week if they don't get a win. I can see them dropping down below 20, below 22 even, maybe down to 25. But for this week, I'm keeping them in the top 20. I'm keeping them tentatively around 18. Moving on to mid, we have the Vikings and the Colts. Again, I've talked about the Vikings game already. 3-0 doesn't count as a game. Vikings stayed in the same spot as last week. The Colts are at 16. They've lost 4 spots. And it's not because they played horrendous. They just played really bad. They lost 34-14 to the Bengals. They've been playing well recently. but most of their wins are against poor teams, or against teams that they should be beating. They're 7-6, but they don't really feel like a 7-6 team. They kind of feel like a 6-7 team, maybe like a 5-7-1 team. But they have been better with Gardner Minshew than with Anthony Richardson, and they are 7-6. So respect to them. But I think that 16 is a fair spot for them, considering how good some of the teams that are slightly above them have been playing recently. Recently, we've seen a big resurgence in this category. We have the Texans at 15 losing 6 spots from last week. Though we have the Rams at 14, we have the Bengals at 13, we have the Packers at 12, and we have the Browns at 11. So basically, Houston has been surpassed by this tier. All of these teams have passed Houston this week, plus another 1 or 2. The biggest reason why is because I'm not sure about CJ Stroud's injury. I don't really like having teams gain or lose more than 5 spots in a week, but CJ Stroud's injury is a little bit concerning, and also I know that he was out for most of the game, but he didn't play particularly well before that. And they're against the Jets, and they lost 30-6. It just was a terrible game overall, and the Texans have been one of the most inconsistent teams in the league. They're 7-6, but they haven't had a hard schedule. They haven't had a schedule where you say, oh, 7-6, that's a good record. You say, oh, 7-6, they could be 9-4. And again, I think that CJ Stroud's going to win Rookie of the Year. I think he's having one of the best rookie seasons ever for a quarterback, but I think that 15 is fair for them until we see how he plays next week. The Rams are at 14. They're at ±0 for this week. That's because they lost, but they lost to one of the best teams in the league. The Rams have had one of the most explosive offenses ever since Kyren Williams has come back. And I think that with Kyren Williams on the team, they're a top 10 team, arguably. They haven't proven it yet, but they've played very well against some tough opponents recently. The Bengals are at 13. They've gained 8 spots this week. That's because it's not just from this week. They also played Monday Night Football last week. And that game also came into account into this because they played that after I made my power rankings for last week. So their win over the Jaguars last week is also included in this +8. It's not just this week's win. But the Bengals have looked really good with Jake Browning. Jake Browning has looked almost like a replacement for Joe Burrow. He's played phenomenally well. I know he went out with an injury this week, but it doesn't look that bad. I think he'll be back next week, and he has looked amazing. The Packers haven't played yet this week. They're at 12. If they lose tomorrow, that'll be tough. They'll probably drop down to 15, but if they win, they'll probably stay where they are. As for the Browns at 11, they gained 5 spots this week because of the addition of Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco didn't look great last week, but he looked a lot better this week. The Browns won a tough game against a good team, the Jaguars, and I'm excited to see what Joe Flacco is able to do with the team. I mean, he's old, but he's not that bad. And so the Browns have a good enough team where Joe Flacco could take them to the playoffs and do okay. And they gained 5 spots this week, mostly because this was what I was hoping to see from Joe Burrow when he signed with the Browns, and I'm curious to see where it goes. I probably could have had them at 12, but I'm putting them at 11 just out of a little bit out of faith. I also put them down way too much when Deshaun Watson got injured, and now I'm kind of just correcting for that mistake because they do have one of the best teams in the league if they have a good quarterback. Moving on to the strong contenders, we have the Bills at 10, the Chiefs at 9, the Broncos at 8, the Lions at 7, and the Jaguars at 6. This is my most controversial tier, probably of the season. Maybe not of the season, but the Broncos being at 8 is as controversial as it gets. They're 7-6, but they've won 5 of their last 6 games, and 6 of their last 7 games. And they haven't had an easy schedule doing it. They beat Kansas City, they beat the Bills, their only losses to Houston. They beat the Vikings, who were on a win streak when they beat them. They've had a tough schedule over their last 7 games, and they're 6 of their last 7. The game before that was a Kansas City loss. So they're 1-1 against Kansas City. They beat Buffalo, and they just look solid right now. like they look like a contender right this season. And so yeah, they haven't had the most amazing season in the world, but this week they beat the Chargers 24-7. The Chargers are bad, but that's a strong win. And Buffalo, they split with them. They're doing better in the division than Kansas City is if you look at margin of victory. And overall, they've just played a good season. Kansas City is on a losing streak. They've lost, I believe, 4 of their last 7 games. So they have played very poorly recently for their standards. And yeah, if you expand it to 8 games, they lost 4 of their last 8. But the Broncos are playing better football right now. And the Bills did beat Kansas City this week, but I'm keeping them below them just because the Bills have not been good. Like, if the Bills had been better, then I'd have them higher than Kansas City, but they have not been playing well. Josh Allen's been inconsistent. There's been a lot of turnovers. I think it's fair to put them at number 10. The Lions are at 7 and the Jaguars are at 6. They both played horrendous games, but I don't really see them. Yeah. The Lions only gained a spot because Kansas City moved below them and nobody moved above them. Like, the Lions and the Jaguars are just kind of in this own little world right now where they've established themselves too much to drop too far in the rankings, but they really can't go anywhere from here because they're not consistent enough. Finally, we have the NFL's elite. We have the 49ers at 1, the Ravens at 2, the Cowboys at 3, the Eagles at 4, and the Miami Dolphins at 5. The Dolphins have gained 1 position this week, although they haven't played yet. If they lose to Tennessee, they'll probably stay at number 5, honestly, because the Jaguars and the Lions are just so inconsistent. So they'll probably stay where they are. The Eagles lost this week to the Cowboys. They have dropped down to number 4, losing 2 positions. This is their 2nd loss in a row. And it's not that I think that they're a very strong team, but 2 losses in a row is concerning, especially considering they're both NFC rivals, and they're both games that should have been more competitive than they were. The 49ers game was horrendous. Obviously, the 49ers destroyed the Cowboys as well. But the Cowboys game was not as close as it should have been either. And so the Eagles have not been playing up to standard recently for how you would expect them to be playing, being a top team in the NFC. So I think 2 positions is fair. The reason why I give the Cowboys the tiebreaker over the Eagles is because the Cowboys are playing better right now. The Cowboys started off, I believe, 4-3 or 5-3. They're now 9-3, and Dak Prescott's playing some of the best football of his career. I think that Dak Prescott is arguably the MVP frontrunner right now. He's put up over 20 touchdowns in the last 5 or 6 weeks, and he's just playing phenomenal football. So because of that, that's why the Cowboys get the tiebreaker over the Eagles, just because they're playing a better version of football right now. I think that the Eagles are a better team, but the Cowboys are playing better football. As for the Ravens at number 2, it was an ugly game, but they got the job done against the Rams. And at number 1, we have the 49ers staying in the same spot. The 49ers have been dominant against very strong teams this season. They're very clearly the number 1 team in the league, and I'm very excited to see how these 5 teams do in the playoffs. This will be a close one. So, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace.